if they let the other prisoners out that I've just mentioned instead of all these prolific offenders, then that will solve the situation. What will also solve the situation is letting out the recalled prisoners, not the ones that have getting out and recalled back in on the early release. A lot of prisoners, I'm sure it's a large proportion, around about 30% of prisoners are in on recall. Not for committing further offences, but for being late for probation appointments, being late going back to the hostel, having an argument with your probation officer because you don't get on with them, they don't see your point of view, they're antagonised you in probation office, you tell them to fuck off, then they issue your recall. That is not a criminal offence. It is breaking your, it's not even breaking your conditions a lot of the time. It's just that probation takes a dislike to you and thinks, right, you trying to get one over on me, I'll get one over on you. See you later, you're going back to prison. No courts, no interviews, nothing. You're recalled straight back to prison without even having your chance to put your point across. And that's what a lot of the inmates are in for, recalls back to prison for not even committing further offences, because probation are getting too handy with their powers. The probation have got the same powers as magistrates and judges. They can sentence you. Well, not sentence you, but they can send you to prison. They've got the power to send you to prison. And the only other people that have got that power are magistrates and judges. But these probation officers are getting too trigger happy with these recalls, and they're just going bang, recalls straight back to prison. And a lot of the time, it was not deserved. Don't get us wrong, a lot of them, or a majority of them, they've got no other option but to recall them because they're committing further offences. But the ones that haven't committed any further offences, let them out, then that will free up the prison spaces massively. There's a lot of people doing big sentences like 15, 16 years, and you get released halfway through. So if you're doing a 16-year sentence, you do 8 years in prison, 8 years on licence. If you've been out for a year, you've still got 7-year licence. Probation might breach you for something that isn't a jailable offence on the outside. You've committed no further offences, but you've got to serve the remainder of your 7 years. But you can come up for parole hearings whilst you're in on recalls on fixed terms as well. But let these back out, the ones that haven't committed any further offences, the ones that have just been recalled for missing appointments or having disputes with the probation officer. Instead of recalling them, saying, go to your manager and say, right, me and Mr. X aren't getting on. Can I give him to another probation officer to see if it's any good for his rehabilitation? Instead of saying, Mr. X is a complete cunt, recall him, get him off the streets. Because that's what they do a lot of the time. They've got too much power. But the IPPs as well, the IPP prisoners are blocking the system up through no fault of their own. There's a massive backlog for parole hearings. Can't get them out because there's not enough staff. There's not enough plans put in place for them because the country is understaffed on the outside and on the inside. So it's taken years sometimes for IPP prisoners to have parole hearings. Sometimes they're coming up for hearings and they get put off because unforeseen circumstances, like either the probation or the parole panel members can't make that date. Some things come up, they've took bad, so it has to be cancelled, and sometimes it's cancelled for 6 to 12 months. Then the inmate is left suffering again, waiting for another hearing. But if things were put in place to get the IPPs out, get them resentenced, the ones that do still pose a risk, because there is a lot that still pose a risk to the public, resentence them, keep the ones in that are dangerous, like the sex offenders, which there's a lot of dangerous sex offenders. This is where it gets very controversial, because with me being an ex-IPP, now I've just had my licence terminated. I'm no longer IPP. A lot of people would think that coming from an IPP, I would say just re-sentence everybody, get them all off it and let them all out of prison. But there is a lot of dangerous prisoners that even myself wouldn't want to be let out of prison. This is why it's so difficult and hard to get the IPPs resentenced. You've got the likes of Baby P mother. She has just been recalled back to prison about 2 weeks ago. Somebody like her who let her baby be murdered off her partner and her housemate does not deserve to be let back out. She was let out, but she's been recalled. But again, you've got people like this. You couldn't just let people like that back out onto the streets. Then you've got John Worboys. I'm sure he got IPP as well. It was either a 2 strikes or an IPP. He was the black cab rapist from London. He raped dozens and dozens. I think it went into the hundreds, but he got convicted on, I can't remember the exact number, so I'll not say it, but it was dozens of women he was convicted of drugging in his taxi. He was given IPP. He actually got his parole hearing. They released him. He got the release on his first hearing, but I think it was the police and the members of the public, or the victims rather, put a petition against it, and then his release was then rejected. I'm not sure if he's still in prison. As far as I know, he is, but the likes of him doesn't deserve to be back out onto the streets. He was a prolific offender that it did say he was responsible for doing over 100 of these crimes to innocent women who were getting in the taxi. He was date raping them. So people like him don't deserve to be back out. The prolific offenders, the dangerous. And there's a lot of fucking bacons in prison that aren't rehabilitated, that can't just be let back out onto the streets because children will be at risk. And this is why it's so controversial. But all they've got to do is re-sentence the prisoners. The ones that you can see are no longer a risk to the public. Release them. Give them another sentence. Put them out on license. Sure, now they can spend about 2 years in the community, whatever. And let them back out to live out here peacefully. Because there's a lot of them that just needs to get out. They're stuck in prison. Prison environment is totally different to being out here in the community. If you're stuck in there, in that mindset, inside of prison, you've got to act different in prison. You've got to be a different mindset, because you will be eaten alive. You will be bullied. Different things like this. So you've got to try and put a different mindset on in prison. But if you're IPP, you're not allowed to. IPPs are supposed to be muted. You're not supposed to talk. You're not allowed to defend yourself. You're not allowed to act in an aggressive manner. You're not allowed to have an argument on the wing because you're deemed unsuitable for release. You've had an argument on the wing, you've acted in an aggressive manner, then they turn around and say you're not being released because you've still got violent tendencies. Everybody has to have violent tendencies in prison to get through prison, because prison is a violent place. It's full of predators. You've got to fight for your survival. But IPPs are supposed to sit there in the corner like a mute, a little choir boy, quiet, and not act in a manner that the other prisoners do. Put 2 prisoners on a wing. One of them is a normal sentence, another one's an IPP. The IPP's keeping his head down. The other prisoner who's got a fixed term is acting up, trying to be the big man, tries to intimidate the IPP. The IPP turns round, sticks up for himself, gets wrote up, he acted in a violent manner, another 12 to 18 months before you have another hearing to prove that you can be a non-violent prisoner. Absolute bullshit. It just doesn't work like that. Prison is a violent place. You need to be able to defend yourself, whether that's verbally or physically. And if you can't, you will be eaten alive. Well, that's the situations that the IPPs are facing in prison, what people from the outside can't see. But I'm a voice for the IPPs. I'll not forget them. I'm out here fighting for them. I'm out here telling the stories about them. I'm out here publicising it, because a lot of people don't even know what IPP is out here in the community. Imprisonment for public protection, a 99-year sentence. you will not be released until the parole board see that you're fit to be released. Someone comes in for a murder, gets out after 12, 13, 14, 15 years, whatever, and the IPP, who hasn't committed any violence, he might have acted in a violent manner, used threatening behaviour, given an IPP, but yet someone who's killed somebody gets out before them. How do you work that one out?